to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Want a Hertz donut?
If that means you're going to punch me, no, I don't.
I'm not.
Is that how that works?
Although
you punch someone and then say, Hertz donut.
I did see in the Facebook Marketplace the other day, or maybe it was a buy-sell trade, somebody like just posted a picture of their fist. Hertz donut, $5. And it was kind of one of those like comedic ones that people just commented on a bunch, and yeah.
So you could pay that guy $5 to get punched?
I don't know. Maybe for someone else. I don't know.
I feel like that's a classic thing. Like, I grew up and like we would say that to each other as siblings. Like, you want a Hertz donut? You want a donut? You want a Hertz donut?
Oh, is that really a thing?
Yeah.
Ours was like a
yeah.
knuckle sandwich.
Oh, you never heard of the Hertz donut for breakfast, knuckle sandwich for dinner, and the sloppy Joe for I don't know. I don't have a dinner one. I don't have one for supper.
Oh, wow.
All right. I don't know what a sloppy Joe is now.
Wet Willie. I was thinking Wet Willie as a sloppy Joe.
That's Wet Willie is not a food thing.
I know that. I was combining them.
Anyways, what are we? We're sticking like Oscar Myers in our ears now. There's a box of Hertz donuts on the table. Thank you, Alex. You decided to. Are you going to open
Alex.
them up? And,
it was an exciting day.
Show what you got for the class.
Speaking of Hertz donuts,
I'm gonna hand it to you. You got it?
I can't reach it.
You're trying to get it.
I can't do it. Speaking of Hertz donuts, today is an exciting day in Omaha. A Hertz donut opened today for the first time, and we're not sponsored by them, but I would love to be. It's a donut company that just does crazy donuts.
Yeah.
So I went to one of my wife's cousin's weddings. I guess this is my cousin-in-law, and this is instead of a cake, they just had these, and I like fell in love. So you picked everybody picked one out, right? Did you have your eyes on it?
Yeah.
That's very exciting.
I have a question though. Is a donut a dessert or breakfast?
Shh. It's anything you want it to be.
This donut, I would say, is definitely dessert.
Yeah, I would say so.
Definitely
Looking
dessert.
at that, yeah.
Or like a special treat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in here, let me just describe for the listeners what we have.
Yeah,
we've got the
Alex.
Jesus. That's what our friend Jess picked out. They've got a lot of cereal options. So they've got.
Do you want me to hold up the?
I don't want to be
explain it.
Frosted animal cookie one.
Frosted animal
amazing.
cookie.
I didn't.
It's like the
see
Tiny
that.
Tim. We've got a s'mores one in there. We've got red velvet with cream cheese.
Yeah,
That's yours, right, Rachel?
Mine.
And then I had a. There's a Nutella one. Nutella, and then we've got Fruity Pebbles.
Wow.
So they've got all sorts of them. I delivered to our crew that's behind the scenes. They had some bacon. Maple bacon, Long Johns.
Shouts out to Austin and Jonathan who are in the room with
we
us
love
right
them.
now.
Yeah.
They're always here on this podcast.
We couldn't do what we do without Austin and Jonathan.
But
It's true.
they both had lovely bacon Long Johns before.
Well deserved. Well deserved Long Johns, boys.
Well, thanks, Alex, for bringing us these donuts. They look really nice. I mean, do you want to take a? I think you should take a bite of one right now.
I'm not going to eat it on the air.
Yeah.
Wait. Has anybody here never had a Hertz donut?
I've had one before.
Yeah, I've had one.
Okay, we've all. Okay.
I think there's no like a first
If we've
time.
never had
Reaction.
one, we had to. Yeah.
At least donuts are something that definitely bring people together. When you put donuts out there on the table, everyone's like, "I'll show up for a donut."
For sure.
Yeah.
Unlike our topic today.
Yes.
Which we had the honor of bringing Minister Mark virtually into our studio to have a discussion about politics, which I don't know that those always bring people together quite.
They're
like
more like a stale donut.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one. I'll pass.
With trash on it.
Yeah. Trash donut. It's a dumpster donut, and you don't want anything to do with it.
Donut. If you had to like say what politics was in a food, what would it be?
Like a dessert or
Any
food. Oh man.
I don't even know.
I feel like the easy answer would be like kale or something, but some people like kale a lot, and I don't mind it.
I just like picture like some pickled pig's feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some
Are those
pig's feet.
those
The claw.
sausages in the can? The Vienna
Oh,
sausages?
I would say caviar because it
Oh.
seems really nice and fancy, but really you're just eating a bunch of fish eggs. So
Oh,
Yeah, cow chips.
cow chips.
Is that a food?
I think that's
Rocky
the thing
Mountain
they leave in the field,
oysters?
Austin. The cow,
I know.
Alex, they leave in the field. It's cow doo doo. That's
Number
what
2.
Whatever it is,
Cow
we're serving it up next.
Yeah, right. Yeah, hang in there.
Stick
people.
around.
Stick around. Minister Mark is here. Thank you for joining us. We have you coming virtually in over a Zoom call. It sounds like you maybe have been visited by COVID by a family member, so you're taking the precautions, doing the responsible thing, and quarantining yourself. But from what we hear, you're feeling fine, right? Feeling good?
Feeling great. Thanks for accommodating me being at home at this time. Sure appreciate it.
Awesome. Today we brought you on to talk about politics. We're going to pick your brain a little bit about that. And we got lots of questions, some of our own, some questions we've asked social media, people to reach out to us. And we've got a lot of their questions as well. But I think before we jump into those questions, I'm going to start by asking if you watched the election last night. I mean, not the election, the debate. Did I just say election? I'm sorry. I'm so.
What?
I think I was so fried after that. I don't know what happened for sure. Did you watch the debate last night?
I did. I'm kind of a news geek, so I watched the pre-show, the debate, and then post-shows on multiple channels.
Man, wow.
You really subjected
He is
yourself to
informed.
it.
Yeah.
I did. Even with all the
Strong.
disappointment that went along with it, I still subjected myself to more.
Wow.
Yeah, I think along with that, I think a lot of people are kind of reeling from it. No matter who they might think they're voting for, it felt like it just felt unpresidential across the board with a lot of interrupting and a lot of name calling and a lot of accusations. And I don't know. Do you have any encouragement to people? Like where do you? I mean, I think people all are just a little bit stressed out by it at this point.
And my encouragement is don't act like that.
Right.
You know, it's there really was a lack of civility and decorum that took place in the midst of the debate. And I think it represents kind of an oppositional nature that our politics have devolved into, where the sides are far more extreme than they were. You know, I think back to when I was a kid or when I was in my 20s. There were differences, but there were certain fundamental things that people agreed on. And now those things are being changed dramatically, and there becomes a feeling that the stakes are so high that I have to let everyone know just how bad the other guy is.
Yeah.
I read something that one of the people tweeted in it. At least for me, it was kind of a convicting thing after watching it, and I was just feeling like, oh, that was yucky. But this person said the debate we watched is a mirror of us. Like we see all of that in our own marriages, our own relationships, our own social media, and so it's kind of like a mirror of what even happens in our own relational lives, but played out in public. And so we're kind of ashamed, but there's also a part of me that's like, I would maybe never do that in public, but sometimes my life looks like that when I want to be right and I want to win, even in my marriage or parenting and all that kind of stuff. So even in the middle of that, I wanted to feel like I would never do that, but I'm like, I do that, you know, in my own life. And so that was a convicting
That's
part
really
for
true.
me as well.
Now, I've been in a lot of meetings with you, Alex, and you have never been that uncivil in any of the meetings I've been a part of. So I want to give you some props there.
But thank
You're
you.
kind of like that, but not totally.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You only call Mark a clown on occasion.
That's
true.
Fool sometimes, clown rarely. Yeah, you know, I do have one other encouragement, and this is just kind of bringing it in from a theological perspective, is that as we look at these debates, our hope is not placed in politics. And I don't want to drop the bomb too early here, but Jesus' kingdom was a kingdom that was not about power over people. And politics basically has two key tools, propaganda and military force that they can use in order to be able to mold a generation. And the truth of the matter is that we don't hope in that kind of power over. In fact, the Bible talks about how power over is always something that's going to fail. And in the end, every government, and you can look, you know, it's Greece, it's Rome, it's Babylon, it's Egypt, all of them have a rise to power and then their power crashes. And so we don't place our hope in that power over. And I think what we saw last night was debate between two people who are trying to exercise power over the culture in something that we know ultimately is destined to fail. So it's important for thoughtful people to say, hey, I know that that is destined to fail, and I've got to place my hope somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And I think sometimes even for Christians, we know this, but I feel like for me personally, after I watched it last night, it's hard to not get sucked into what's going on. And I feel like this year has just been so exhausting in so many ways. And then to have this to kind of like just finish, it kind of just pushed me over the edge where I was just like, oh my, I can't take this anymore. Like there is so much going on. And I know like my hope is in the Lord. And I know like this is not where everything, you know, is controlled, but like just to see these two men who are supposed to be potential leaders for our country basically just tearing each other down for 2 hours was just enough to just kind of push me over the edge where I was like, I don't know what to do anymore. So it's hard.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mark, too, about power, because when I was watching last night, I'm like, even if they did agree, even if there was something where they were like, hey, this does sound good. Like, would you know?
Right.
Because you're not going to hear that. You're not going to find that out. It is more of like power of whose side are we going to go to?
Right.
It's overwhelming. How do you know?
I think, and in that regard, I do think that there's some value. You know, I wouldn't completely disconnect from the dialogue, because those of us who are followers of Jesus really do need to make some important decisions. One thing that's super unique about us compared to pretty much everybody who is in the biblical audience or the biblical narrative is that we are people who have the privilege of being able to vote. And so because of that, understanding issues, understanding people, being able to vote, I don't think we throw our arms up and, you know, throw caution to the wind. We have to continue to stay informed on these things, because part of our privilege and duty, according to Romans 13, submitting to the governing authorities, is that we participate in moments like elections, and getting informed is critical to do that.
Yep, and I think that's the feeling, and that's why we're here to have this conversation a little bit, because I think you can feel it from all of us. Just like we get it, we live in, we're citizens of heaven, and we can celebrate that. But we have a duty and a civility inside of this country that we're living in, and so that's where we want to help people make some informed decisions and ways to process that on and I think also on every level, because I think so much of the time it's just it becomes about the presidential debate, but there's presidential election, but there's so much more going on, and then we give them too much power, more power than they even have. We do that with Satan too, but that's for another podcast. But we subscribe way too much power to just that position, and then kind of make our decisions for everybody else sometimes under whoever we think should be there. So,
So while we're on the subject of voting, Mark, I want to hear your thoughts on what if somebody's listening, and I think you have some compelling things that you've already said about voting and our privilege to vote, but what would you say to somebody who wants to abstain from voting this year, or is feeling convicted in that way, or they're feeling like, I only have the options between the lesser of two evils, I'm just not going to vote this year?
A great question. And I would say a couple of things. One is that voting happens on local, state, national levels, and there's multiple races in all those levels. So even if you feel like the presidential vote is an exercise in futility, there are other votes that matter a lot. In fact, the smaller the vote, so local more than state, state more than national, your vote counts disproportionately more, and it has a deeper impact on what happens in your neighborhood, in your kids' lives, the things around you. So I would say A, vote local. But B, I would say, even if your choice is the lesser of two evils, and I know a lot of people who feel that way this year, and a lot of people who say, I'm wishing for option C. You know, is there somebody else that we could bring into this conversation? And I think pragmatically, we really don't have an option C. But as bringers of the kingdom of God, part of our actions is that we're to be salt and light in this culture. And I think salt is about preventing the decay of the culture around us. So if you have one candidate who's going to help the culture to decay quickly, and one candidate who's going to still be a part of the decay, but it'll be slower, I think part of our responsibility as bringers of the kingdom and salt in this culture is that we do vote for the lesser of two evils. And I know that some people just kind of have to hold their nose and go in and fill out their ballot. But I would say you do it not because you think this is the best possible outcome, but that this is the best of the possible outcomes.
That's good.
Yeah, so you speak a little bit about the lesser of two evils. I'm sure that you have one in mind of the two that you'd like to endorse today. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. Don't do that.
I could get in trouble.
But I think that's an interesting point, because when I hear you say that, I think everyone who's already made up their mind is thinking the person they're voting for is the lesser of two evils. And that's not just a Christian versus the secular world debate. That's within our own community. People feel very strongly against both men. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and another question I kind of have too that I've been thinking through this year is, obviously with the debate, we've seen these two people who are representing different parties. I'm kind of like, well, do I vote for a person or do I vote for a party? Because obviously these two different parties have different viewpoints on different things, and their goals are different. But the people that are representing them, I might not agree with who's representing them. So how do you take away maybe the face of who's representing the party? Do you do that? Do you take away the face of who's representing the party? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think faith matters dramatically because faith informs your worldview, and your worldview informs your politics. So the most important thing about a person is, what do they think of God? What's their basis of morality? Where are they sensing the good is? How do they define what the good of culture is? And so from those regards, I think that a person's faith is incredibly important. For me, the way I approach it is I approach it primarily by issue, secondarily by person, and third by party. Now, the way that it turns out is that if you are somebody who cares about certain issues more than others, you will tend towards one party more than tend towards the other party, because parties do tend to align around certain issues. Probably the clearest and most divisive is the pro-life, pro-choice platform. And I'm very strongly pro-life. There's no hiddenness of that.
Yeah.
And so that will tend me towards certain candidates and certain parties.
Yeah.
But for me, it's not about the party. It's about the issue. And then the issue will inform the way that I vote. That's one issue, but I would say everything from, for me, national debt, immigration, care for the poor, Supreme Court nominations, education, all of those come into play. And I think as informed voters, we have to look at the whole picture and say, okay, what does the whole person view each issue as? And when we vote according to a person, that means we have to do homework. And so we have to first know what the issues are. Second, we have to do a little research on what the candidates think about the issues. And then we head into the voting booth with our informed decision.
Yeah.
So as Christians, I think we have a call to accountability, especially for those who are Christian or not Christian. Like even in my relationships with friends or family members, like I'm called to judge, a Christian brother differently than I am someone who's not. And obviously both of these candidates are claiming, and every presidential candidate in history has claimed to be Christian, at some level. But I think one of them has attached their faith a little bit more to their morality and to their candidacy and kind of done that. So what do we do as Christians who are like, hey, how do I hold this person accountable to the fruit of the Spirit? If this person's claiming that they are one thing, but I'm seeing a lack of fruit of the Spirit, like self-control, I guess you could just name a lot of the fruit of the Spirit inside of them, that is lacking. And I think we see it lacking in both, but is there more of a charge to the one who is saying, hey, yes, this is really something I do believe in, and I do want accountability around, yet we don't see it. Do we weigh both of them differently because of a perceived, I actually do believe in this and I do want this to be a part of my life, than a person who's like nominally maybe digging into their religion? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And yes, I think there is a higher accountability in the Christian community towards somebody who claims to be a follower of Jesus. And we have to be self-aware. Is this person just playing a game in order to be able to get political power through the way that they're approaching their faith? I think that's an important question. Since you referred to the presidential election, we have one who claims to be an evangelical, one who claims to be a Catholic. Both of them say that it informs their politics significantly. And both of them have huge gaps. They've both said things that are racist. They've both been accused of sexual misconduct. They've both proposed policies that I would say are contrary to what the Bible says. And so to me, in that race, in the end, it winds up being a wash. That you've got two people who are claiming to be Christians, but lacking in Christian character and morality in significant ways.
Yeah.
And so to me, it doesn't tip the scales either way. It would if there was one who is authentically living out his faith and one who is hypocritically living out his faith. I think there are examples of people who live their life really well in the political arena. And if you do have Christians that are doing that, to me, that's a differentiating factor.
Yeah.
In this race, both of them have significant moral gaps that show, their faith that they proclaim and the way that they're living or the policies that they're promoting have some gaps.
So some would say that because of our two-party system, we're kind of given the illusion of choice, that really it's just two sides of the same coin. Do you see a future or a possibility of our country ever rising above this two-party system? Is there you kind of mentioned already that there isn't really a legitimate third-party option. Is this something that as Christians Christians who are involved in politics, should we be striving towards a third-party option to maybe give us a better choice in the overall scheme of things?
Yeah, that is a great question. And, I remember back in the days of guys like Ross Perot, who were running for office as a third-party candidate. And here's the challenge, I think, of third-party candidates in our system, is if they're left of the Democrats, then they split the Democratic vote, and the person they like least, farthest on the right, gets elected. If they're further right from the Republicans, then the same thing happens. The Republican vote splits, and the Democrat gets elected. Yeah. So it becomes a disincentive to be able to engage in politics. What you would really need to have is somebody who would be in a hybridized type of philosophy that doesn't go right or left of the candidates, but picks the best of both worlds to be able to get in. Personally, I'd love to see that. I think that would be a very helpful piece for our culture and would create some fresh waves. And I think that it would only happen in the midst of massive frustration. And let me say, I think we are in that place right now where the frustration levels with the political system is higher than I've ever seen in my lifetime. So I'd love to see that emerge. Eric, are you running? Are you proposing that?
No,
I'd love to vote Eric.
I would be happy to be on the ballot. My follow-up question was, what about Kanye West? As he says, he is still part of the birthday party. I think it is one of those things where he is trying to get out there. He obviously wasn't in the debates, and he's not on the ballot in a lot of states. So, but
we cannot vote for him, but you can.
Yeah,
you live in
I do
Iowa.
live in Iowa, so I will be. I guess I'll be voting for Kanye. So.
I think one of my, and as I'm even trying to shepherd people, and I know you and I talked briefly, and if you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, I think that's like a very timely kind of show to watch, because I think one of the things that I've found myself doing is people that previously I was like, man, they're really intelligent, they're smart people, they're sensible, and then I follow them on social media, I'm like, they're not. Like, how did they get so dumb? And I think that's programmed by social media and the algorithms and all that kind of stuff, that we're being fed things that are just feeding the same narrative and an echo chamber. None of us really want to admit that we're pawns in that, because it's a difficult thing to admit. But how do you help people how do we hold people accountable, I think, that are Christians, that are sharing false narratives or just things that aren't fact-checked, things that are just plain false? I think that happens on both sides, but because of our desire and love for a candidate, and we get emotionally attached to this, we just can start sharing things that are just lies or just false and disingenuous type of information? How would you help us learn how to shepherd people? I think social media is one of those places that it's the most glaring and the most obvious, because that's where you can share these things. And so have you had conversations or seen people that you're like, yeah, that meme, that's just bad, or that's just bad information, and how do you lovingly tell that person, stop?
Yeah. So first thought is on the Netflix show, The Social Dilemma, 2 thumbs up. I think that is one of the absolute best documentaries that I've seen, maybe ever. I mean, it's really, really well done. Executives who come from companies that have talked about the moral dilemmas of Google and Facebook and other social media companies. Just 100%. I just think everybody should be watching that. It's brilliant stuff. But getting back to how do you talk to people on social media? I've got a few key tips. Number one is you got to evaluate what your relationship is with that person. How much weight can criticism take in that person's life? For those of us who are in ministry, I think that we get a lot more credibility and a lot more weight in people's lives. And so we have the opportunity to do that. But for me, with every person, I weigh how strong can I come on in this interaction? How gentle do I need to be? My old friends from college, man, I go after it hard with them because there's a lot of weight behind it. And there's ability to be able to talk on a deeper level than you can with any other people. Second thing I would say is take the conversation offline. And so if you're on Facebook, for example, do a messenger rather than posting on their wall. If you're going to be confrontational about stuff, that allows them to take their defenses down, because if they're defending themselves in front of everybody, they've been embarrassed and they're likely to entrench. But if you talk to them on the side, then they can say, yeah, I can admit that was wrong. And maybe, and I've seen some people do this, I've seen them backtrack on things. Particularly if I come with a website or a reference that shows statistically or factually how that's wrong, and I don't embarrass them publicly, they're more likely to pull down those posts or apologize or repost that themselves because they're doing it out of their own volition, not because somebody confronted them publicly. And I do think that we have to be passionately committed to the truth, even if the person on our feed agrees with our conclusion. If their facts aren't right in the process, we should be confronting that just for the nature of being people who are committed to truth.
And I think along with that, a lot of times we see this dehumanizing of candidates or anything in the political realm. It's just you're red or you're blue, and nobody wants to take the time to actually understand their platform, what they stand for, what they believe in. And this isn't just with presidential candidates, it's all across the board. And how do we as Christians break that down and realize that we are talking about humans? And I think that you'll see this happen a lot where some rumor will get spread like, oh, Joe Biden's on drugs or Nancy Pelosi's an alcoholic. And it's a rumor, but then it takes grip into people's hearts. And then they just talk about this person in this negative manner. And it's like, whether you like them or not is besides the point. They're a human being. There's something created in the image of God. And we, our words, I think we've talked about that before on this podcast, but our words are really powerful. And I think sometimes when we reduce it to just a political party, we feel this freedom to just say whatever divisive things we want about these people and forget the fact that they are humans created in God's image.
Yeah.
It's super well said, Eric. Super well said. And we need to remember that reflects on us as well. So when we dehumanize other people, it doesn't just dehumanize them, it dehumanizes us. And it's an important part of our witness as followers of Jesus as well.
All right, we're getting a little ways through some of these questions. We're still just climbing up the hill, though, a bit.
Okay, we'll go back real quick to social media, Mark, when you were talking about fact checking and maybe sending things to people to help them get better information. Do you have places that you go or that you recommend that you use that maybe like are unbiased or that you use to do fact checking or anything you can?
I do have a few places that I go to. One of the biggest things I do is I'll go back to the candidate's page and see what they say about their own views. Because sometimes, if we're talking about candidates, it's views that just, are totally contrary to what they say about themselves. Yeah. And I think we need to give people the benefit of the doubt on letting them define what their own views are. So going back to their own sites is one of the smartest things in the political arena to be able to do. I've used Snopes a number of times in the past to be able to debunk general myths. But then I found that Snopes has some things that they've gotten wrong in the past as well. So I've been using them a lot less lately. And so I don't have other go-to sites that I would head towards. But usually with politics, I go to that person's site.
Go to the source.
Go to the source. That's right.
Where does the boy who cried wolf kind of philosophy come into this, where you go to a source, right, and that's where you would hope that the truth about them is, but then they blatantly lie about something. So how do when trust is eroded in a candidate or anybody, in general, but especially in a candidate, when you're like, well, I see your site and I see what you stand for, but I've also heard you lie about this or embellish about this on many occasions. How do we lean into trusting those sources or that person when trust has just been eroded in a lot of ways?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you've got to look at the person's words and you got to look at their deeds and see how do they match up. And the truth of the matter is the more somebody lies about the position that they're in, the less they're going to be trusted. And I think the less they should be trusted. One of the interesting things from a Christian perspective is that we are called to forgive people. But I think the idea of forgive and forget is unwise and unbiblical. So we should forgive and remember and realize that forgiveness is all about releasing the bitterness that's inside of us. It's not lacking in discernment for future decisions. So if we see somebody who's caught in a lie over and over again, then not trusting them in the future, I think it's just wise stewardship of our mind and of biblical Christianity.
Yeah.
That's good.
So
I don't know if you have any advice on that, Alex, because it's a great question.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think the more trust gets eroded, the more difficult it is to have that trust, and it breaks down. And you see that in any place, and you also see like people caught off guard and words used in false narratives or not an entire quote and all that kind of stuff. And so I think it just drives more into like we have to go back and find a full story. We're a snippet kind of culture where you take one snippet or one thing and then it becomes something that was totally like people can read in that moment that it was out of context and wouldn't call a person out, but then the whole world puts one sentence together and they're like, oh, this was the worst thing that was ever said. And so I do think, just like studying scripture, context matters. And so when we have conversations with people and talk about their character, well, context matters, I think, in that as well. And so
I think, not to go back to the debates too much, but I think we saw some of that last night on the debate where whether it was law and order or white supremacy, this kind of, hey, well, if you denounce one thing or the other, you're going to lose your platform, and it was just, it's such a divisive way to have a conversation because it doesn't allow either party to actually say what they believe or what they stand for. But then you also see a little fear on both sides of that they might legitimately lose support from these groups. But yeah, I wonder, how do we, I feel like as Christians, we have this duty almost to just stand for things that are just and speak out against that stuff, and not worry about, because I think a lot of times we're seeing people kind of dip their toes into viewpoints that are hateful because they feel like they have to align with that to support their party, and they can't say anything negative about our president because that might hurt his reelection.
Do you think it's
I think that...
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, I was just going to ask, do you think it's wise to use the WWJD question when voting? So, for example, I saw last night, someone post, hey, I'm so grateful, a Christian putting some perspective out there that I, am not a part of this world, that I'm a part of a different kingdom, that my hope is not ultimately here. And then I saw someone comment, me too, but Jesus would vote for Trump. So is it wise... Is it wise to, make those decisions? Like I don't think we know, right? Like who Jesus would vote for. So, but I think a lot of Christians are willing to kind of suggest it because of course Jesus would vote for who I would vote for because we all think we look a little more like Jesus than we actually do. Or at least I do, maybe not anybody else. But do you think it's wise, to add that layer, to speak for Jesus in like a prophetic way, because I think there are pastors, there's leaders kind of under the guise of, or maybe it's real, maybe you can help us, prophetically speaking for how Jesus would vote, and that has a big sway in emotional and spiritual way in the lives of people.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I think that we can and should speak prophetically about the issues that are confronting us. So some of you have been following on Facebook that I've put a couple of risky posts out there the last couple of weeks, one of them on abortion. And so people said, oh, we know you have a veiled way of speaking about who you're really voting for because I'm strongly pro-life. And then the next week it was about poverty. And people said, I'm not really sure who he's going to be voting for after seeing that post. And so I think we need to talk issue by issue about what the things are that are on the heart of God, that are on the heart of Jesus. One of the things that's very difficult about deciding who would Jesus vote for is that Jesus votes with omniscience. And so he has perfect understanding of what could happen in all matters of the future. And he would vote with that perfect kind of omniscience. We have to realize that we are sin-stained people who live in a sin-stained world, and we see things imperfectly as it heads towards the future. So we need to have some humility in that. But the other thing that's very interesting, just as you look in a biblical context, is that the Bible talks about how God causes the rising and falling of kings, and even the king's heart are like waters that are channeled in his hands. And so we go, okay, so God's sovereignty reigns even over bad elections, even over elections that go the way that we don't want them to go. It's critical for us to understand that, because whether you're under, Stalinist Russia or Maoist China or the United States of America, God's sovereignty has been behind the rising and falling of rulers in all of those places. And sometimes the rising of rulers is hostile towards Christianity. Now, why is that? We can't always know, but we know that in God's sovereign plan, he's guiding the course of world history, which includes the rising and falling of kings and princes and senators and presidents and so forth. So when the election comes through on November, whatever it'll be, 30th or December 12th, or whenever all the mail-in ballots wind up getting counted and everything gets resolved at the end, we can have confidence that we go, okay, well, God's in charge. And regardless of what happened in the election, we can move forward with confidence, not because of our confidence in who got elected, because of our confidence that Jesus is still on the throne.
That's good. Yeah. Mark, you mentioned a couple of issues that both candidates kind of are looking at. And I think a lot of times Christians are just kind of, they don't want to dig really deep. And so they just pick one key topic and they just vote off of that key topic. Like, okay, he's on this side, so I'm just going to vote for him. What are maybe the top key topics that you would recommend people to look at other than just one thing? If they want to start doing a little more research, what are some of the top things that they could look at?
Yeah, I've already mentioned that abortion is a big deal for me. And if babies really are people, and if removing them from a womb really is murder, then that's a genocide issue that we should take very seriously. I think poverty is a very important issue that we should be taking a look at as Christians. How do policies of candidates affect the least of these? And we live in a very interesting culture that's got systems that help to create that for us through governmental systems. My ultimate dream is that the church could be depended on to do that. But the truth of the matter is that the government is forcing some of that to happen. So how do we do that in a way that's wise stewardship of the resources that actually helps people, not only in the moment, but how does it help people escape the cycle of poverty?
Yeah.
Does it keep them in dependence on the government, or does it help them to escape the cycle of poverty more than just in the moment? I think that's critical. I think immigration is an important issue. The Bible always talks about caring for the alien and the stranger in your midst, and asking the question, how do we go about that when immigration is legal? How do we go about it when immigration is illegal? I think it is a very hard issue for a president, senator, congressman to deal with. And it doesn't have a clear political answer in the Bible, but there is a clear answer for the church that we respond with passion and grace in that arena. I think the economy is a big deal, not because money is a big deal, but if the economy goes well, those who are the most vulnerable are less marginalized, if that makes sense. So it affects the economy, affects the poor more than it affects the rich. Particularly if you're looking at numbers like unemployment, we give the poor the best chance to move forward with that. I think that education is really important. I'm a big proponent of choice in education. We chose to homeschool our kids part of the time and public school our kids part of the time. And I'm glad that we got to make the decision of how our kids got educated. And I think the more that education gets put in the hand of the states, the local authorities, and the parents, even more so, the better it is. And I think that's the better it is for the poor. Yeah. Because wealthy people have the opportunity to choose their educational values whenever they want to. They've got the financial resources to do it. But the government can make it possible for those who are poor to have a similar level of choice. And I think that that's one of the things that breaks the generational cycle of poverty that's out there.
Good.
So those are about 5. Oh, I'll tell one more that I think about a lot.
Oh, okay, go.
International policy and how it winds up affecting safety, dictators, peace in the Middle East, those kinds of questions. And I think whether or not you have a strong military makes a big difference. How you treat brutal dictators makes a big difference. What your stance is towards Middle East policy makes a big difference. And I look at all of those questions as significant towards not only the future of the United States, but the future of the world and peace for the world.
Good, yeah.
So we do all our research. We pray. We have our conversations civilly on social media and with our family members and friends. And we get to the first Tuesday of November and we go and vote. How do we respond, Mark, if our candidate does not win?
Yeah, my thought is that you respond with submission to the sovereignty of God. And you say, you know what, there's a lot bigger things that happen in life. One of the things I think is really important for us as followers of Jesus is to realize that as members of the kingdom of God, our hope is not in what happens in government. Our hope is what happens in eternity, and that this life is just a puff of smoke in the breadth of what's happening in the world. And our country is only one bit player on the world stage. I think, and this is only one of, scores of elections that have happened in American history. So sometimes I think we think of ourselves as too big of a deal. I think of the people who spiraled into depression, who canceled classes after the last election, who took to the streets and protest. Yeah. I just think that is not the way of Jesus at all. That's an indicator, if that's your response to spiral into depression or head to the streets, that you are placing your hope in the wrong place. Yeah. And that we have to have our eye on eternity and our hope in Jesus.
I was also thinking too, when I asked that question, I could have said the other way too. Like, what if our candidate does win? Because we have a responsibility. Like, we're not going to rub this in people's faces. Like, we should have a standard and a high standard for how we act in both.
It's really good. Yeah.
Both ways.
What would you say, hypothetically, my wife and I, we have different passions and different things that lead us, and God's wired us differently for, maybe one of us, that abortion thing is really a big deal, and maybe the other person poverty and, some of the social ways that we take care of people. And I think, what if me and my wife decide to vote for different people? Mm-hmm. Does that mean there's disunity in our home, that the home is being led poorly by, as we are married? What does that teach our kids? Is that right? Is that wrong? If we both come to different conclusions and we've both been praying
to you and
should she just vote for right? I think there are, and I've had this conversation, with a couple that they love each other. It's a godly marriage, but they both really are passionate about different things that are leading them and prayerfully leading them to two different candidates. Mm-hmm. What would you say is that possible? Or would you say, no, that's just bad. It's a bad relationship. One should be able to sway the other. What in that kind of scenario?
I would advise that couple to take a 1-month vacation starting about October 25th. And I think that it's very possible for us to disagree. If it's in a marriage, it's hard because you're in each other's face every single day and you've got some different values that you're going by. And I think that you just need to use discernment and wisdom as to when do we engage in this conversation and when is it becoming destructive to something that's more important. So your marriage is far more important than your politics. Your faith is far more important than your politics. And if it's becoming an obstacle to either of those, then I would say it's probably a good subject to avoid. Vote separately, don't taunt each other, love each other through the process, and continue to lift the other person up. I think biblically, when you look at Ephesians 5 and it says submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, marriage is essentially a race for the bottom, where our goal is to lift the other person up and not beat the other person down. So as a married person, husband or wife, you've got to ask yourself the question, how do I lift my spouse up, even when I disagree with their views, even if I disagree passionately? How do I raise them up to a place where they feel honored, loved, and cherished in every moment?
That's good. We have a few more questions from social media. We each personally put out kind of our fillers on our own accounts to see what questions people had. So I think we're going to kind of maybe rapid fire through some of these questions. The first one that I've got here is about mail-in ballots. Is that something that we should be concerned about? I mean, in this time of the pandemic, there's a lot of people who probably don't want to go into a public space to vote. Is that something they should try to prioritize? Is there real concern around mail-in ballots?
So on the mail-in ballots issue, I actually lost you for just a moment there on my internet feed, but I think I caught the gist of the question.
Mainly is it something that we should prioritize to be in person, or is that a safe route to choose the mail-in option?
Yeah, if I'm looking into the crystal ball of what's going to happen in the future, certain states, mail-in ballots are going to be counted if they're postmarked by the day. So I think we know that in those states, the election results will be delayed for a week. If there is a landslide vote, I think it's not going to matter.
Oh, I think we lost you there a little bit. Can you still hear us? Yeah, it's something that's so crazy. I think it's on a lot of people's minds, especially with rumors that are spreading right now about, someone dumped a bunch of ballots in the river or we found them in a dumpster. And
I think it's a legitimate question. And I think some people feel like they have to do a mail-in vote because they don't want to go to the polls. And so
that helps me at all. All right.
There you are. I was just picking your nose on screen. So
oh my goodness.
You're still frozen.
Are we okay now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Your video's a little frozen, but we hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, last I heard was about mail-in ballots. Is that where we are right now?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, if I'm to look into the crystal ball and say, what do I think is going to happen? I would say that some states have a law that it just has to be postmarked by the day that elections happen. In that case, I would guess it'll be at least a week before they get counted. And if it's a close election, that's really going to matter. If it's a blowout election, it's not going to matter. Certain states, somebody's got 270 and all their counts are in, and it'll be just fine. But I think that, this is going to be a closer election. I think that every state is going to matter and vote-in ballots will matter. I do think that there's massive potential for fraud in vote-in mail-in ballots, and there's massive potential for mistakes to be made in those kinds of ballots.
Yeah.
So my guess is that thousands to hundreds of thousands of ballots will be considered invalid. And then there will be controversy about which ones should and shouldn't be considered invalid if we have something like the Bush-Gore hanging Chad issue, where it's just within hundreds of votes in a significant state. And I think that it going to the Supreme Court is a very real possibility for us in this matter, because of certain states that have decided to do not just absentee voting, but to do the mail-in voting, where they're actually sending them to every single person. It's really an administrative disaster waiting to happen. Any of us who have done mailing lists that are out of date know that that's a disaster waiting to happen. I know that we got 4 absentee notices to our house, which include 2 of our kids who have already moved out of state. And so if I use just us as one little example there, we have the potential for fraud that nobody would know about.
Right.
And that's going to happen thousands and thousands of times all over the world.
Wow. Yeah.
Anybody else have any that they want to share? I know I have a couple, but
yeah, go for it. A lot of mine were covered.
Mine in. So
what, you already got yours in?
Yeah, same.
Okay. This one, we might have covered it I think we talked about it a little bit, but how can we genuinely eliminate hate of differing parties and opinions, and that are so prevalent now? It's just and I think we kind of touched on this, but I guess to further it, like, is there any coming back off this ledge? Like, I feel like we as a culture and a country, we're just right there on the edge of just complete demise in some ways, because we can be so polarizing and so hateful over things that maybe are a little bit petty.
I think as followers of Jesus, we've got an amazing advantage over the rest of the world, and that is that we have a divine resource of infinite love for people. Mm-hmm. And so for us, simply by pressing into Jesus himself, we have the ability to refill our love tank when hate may seem to be the order of the day.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I would say we need to view people through the lens of how God views them. So somebody mentioned earlier today that these are people who are created in the image of God. They were made for good works, that God's plan is to redeem them. And his master strategy for the world has little to do with politics and everything to do with redeeming individual lives one by one.
Yeah.
And so we need to go, man, that person is somebody who matters to God. How can I put opinions in the back seat? Now, and this is particularly important if somebody is not a follower of Jesus, and so they begin with a moral framework that's very different from ours to begin with. We can't expect them to have the same moral framework that we have, and so we, give them a lot of extra grace, and don't expect a Christian perspective from somebody who hasn't bought into the Christian worldview.
Yeah.
And we think, how can I love them as a person in ways that transcend political issues?
Yeah, that's really good. All right, I think that does it for all of our questions.
I have one.
Oh, you have a question?
I think it was answered, but
now he's got one.
Well, it was one that one of my friends sent in. I think you answered this, but I think for just the clarity and succinctly answering it, can you be Christian and vote Democrat for president? Can you be a Christian and vote for Joe Biden? And can you be a Christian and vote for Donald Trump this election? Does voting for the other one make you less Christian?
I would say absolutely you can. And particularly if you begin with the idea that all of us are working with imperfect information, that everything that we get from newspaper articles to TV media to all that kind of stuff is spun one way or another, depending on the agenda of who's spinning them. It leaves us at a place where every single one of us needs to have the humility to say, I have imperfect information, and I'm going to do the best job to vote based on the imperfect information that I have.
Yeah.
And I'm going to trust that other people will do the same thing and not question their faith by the way that they vote.
Yeah.
But I think to engage in spirited dialogue around that is certainly legitimate and sometimes helpful.
Yeah. That's encouraging, I think, for people to hear that.
Yep.
Any final thoughts before we leave you today?
No final thoughts from me except to continue to submit to Jesus, run hard after him, trust in the kingdom of God as power under, not as the kingdom of this world for power over. I know we're going to be talking about this overtly in two of our messages this week on Revelation. When we talk about the two beasts and the 666, I'm going to hit on some political issues in a big way. And then Jed's going to be doing his sermon on the fall of Babylon. And that'll touch on some political, cultural issues as well. So I'll use this as a chance to do a little advertisement for both of those messages. We're straight out of the book of Revelation. We're going to have some great things to learn.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thanks for your time,
Thanks,
Mark. Stay healthy. Hopefully everyone in your home is able to stay healthy and have some chicken noodle soup or something.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. See ya.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, I want to thank Mark for being here and taking the time to meet with us. Thanks everybody for having great questions and pulling your personal social media friends and all of that. That's fun to see that perspective. That does it for us today. If you have any questions or concerns, comments, you want to reach out to us, you can do that on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.